Chapter 23. The Black Desert. Professor Chin emphatically shook his hands. We must not open it. The coffin, accommodating the entwined remains of Prince Puemo and his wife, is a national treasure. We lack the requisite conditions and environment here. Opening it would destroy the sealed coffin and its contents. Our mission on this expedition is to submit an assessment report to our superiors, to apply for an excavation permit, or to provide due protection to these ancient relics. We will let Chao Guo and Chu Jian take detailed notes. I will personally write the report. It seemed I would miss the opportunity to see whatever treasures lay within the coffin. Despite understanding the professor's rationale, I couldn't help feeling a twinge of disappointment as we climbed back to the ceremonial chamber above. Originally, a multitude of animal skins had been sealed over the stone door of the sacrificial chamber, which I had already shredded with a flat shovel. Professor Chin explained that these skins, from cattle and sheep, were used to keep the room dry and to isolate it from the sacred well's moisture. The ancient people of Puemo would bring live animals into the chamber for slaughter. Warm, freshly peeled skins were then immediately plastered into the door's crevices, leaving only bones behind after cleaving the meat, which was interred within. The door would only be reopened for the next sacrificial ceremony. Such eerie rituals of slaughtering animals, skinning, and tying mummified bodies to wooden stakes were believed to preserve the water source of the sacred well indefinitely. People of the ancient desert believed that life's soul originated from holy water, a notion somewhat parallel to Darwin's theory of the origin of life. We couldn't reuse the animal skins to reseal the stone door. Besides the camels, there were no large animals in the vicinity. But to us, the 19 camels were precious, so stripping their skins for such a purpose was out of the question. Instead, we used layers of adhesive tape to close the gaps. After resting for 3 days in Shi City, the archaeological team set off to the south and finally entered the area locally known as the Black Desert. This part of the sandy sea no longer bore the sight of desert poplar trees or undulating sandhills. Rather, the dunes around us were almost uniformly flat, like an endless sea of flattened buns. From any direction, the view was the same, vast and lifeless. I inquired if Anlaman had ever ventured into this stretch of the desert. The old man replied with a rueful smile, "This is the hell of yellow sand. Even Allah himself is reluctant to come here. I've only been here once before, and that's now. If it weren't for your esteemed commanders and the white camel favored by Allah, I would rather die 100 times than enter." Despite his complaints, Anlaman was known as a living map of the desert, and it was no fluke. He was as familiar with the desert as a woman with her kitchenware. Even though it was his first time in this forbidden region of the Black Desert, he relied on his sharp eyes, which could spot the traces of shrubs like tamarisk and saxaul hidden in the sandpits. By following these plant trails and drawing upon his years of experience in the desert, he led the archaeological team onward. The desert encompasses China's largest inland water systems, where rivers such as the Darim have largely infiltrated the sandy grounds, concealing beneath the apparently barren surface what may be surging underground streams. Certain plants specially adapted to desert conditions cling to life by absorbing the scant moisture rising to the desert surface from the underlying aquifers. While the desert seems sparsely vegetated, numerous animals do thrive there, albeit primarily emerging to hunt in the coolness of the night. In times as far back as the Han Dynasty and even earlier, the Taklamakan was known as the ancient homeland. Back then, the desertification was less severe. Rivers had not yet penetrated underground, and the region was dotted with oases, towns, forts, Buddhist monasteries, and post stations. Countless caravans transporting silk, spices, and tea traversed the area, including, up until the Yuan dynasty, the famed Italian Marco Polo as he journeyed to the Central Plains with a trade convoy. By the Ming dynasty, as the Ottoman Empire rose and spanned across Eurasia, it disrupted overland trade between Europe and the Asian continent. An era dedicated to the sea emerged as explorers opened up new maritime trade routes, shifting the primary lines of commerce from land to sea, coming to be known as the Age of Geographical Discovery. With the desert's encroachment intensifying and the environment becoming increasingly hostile, the small nations within were driven to decline, and the former prosperity and glory seemed to be carried away by divine forces. The Black Desert was among the earliest areas to be forsaken by the gods, with its civilization ceasing by the Jin dynasty. Legends spoke of Allah's wrath, which consumed the cities of heretics, and to this day, the Black Desert remains a lifeless expanse. On our first day of travel, we encountered a mild sandstorm that lent the sky a faint yellow hue. The sand was minimal, and fortunately, it obscured the sun enough to permit travel during the day. Shirley Yong consulted the notebook left by the British explorers and discussed our route with Anliman. According to the notes, leaving Shi City, the explorers had discovered an area nearby with a significant number of stone tombs. They planned to return for excavation, so they had outlined a detailed route in their notes. Anliman's experience, along with Shirley Yang's notebook, couldn't pinpoint our location with absolute precision, but they provided substantial guidance concerning distance and direction. When we made camp for the night, Anliman found an elevated area where we built a sand barrier on a dune to offer some wind protection and settled the camels behind it before lighting a fire on the leeward side for warmth. The journey that day was quite arduous, mainly due to the sandstorm. Although it wasn't strong, it was enough to vex and disorient us. Anliman muttered that it was the windy season in the Black Desert where this type of weather was typical every second day. Without wind, he warned, the malevolent sun could sap the last drop of moisture from a traveler's body. Fatty remarked, well, a bit of heat is good. Sweating helps to lose weight, and sunbathing is rather pleasant. It's just the incessant wind making it impossible to even talk on the road, which is suffocating. You don't understand, replied Anliman. This is only the edge of the Black Desert. It will take another 5 days before we are truly deep inside it. I've never been that far myself, but I know friends who have, and they all survived their journey through the desert. He explained that the horrors of the Black Desert lay not in the quicksand or the gold-devouring ants, nor even the black sandstorms. Legend spoke of a fantastical place deep within the desert, where weary and thirsty travelers probe feverishly after visions of lakes, rivers, beautiful women, mythical beasts, snow-capped mountains, and oases. Alas, these are all devilish traps meant to lure people to their doom. However, Anliman reassured us that Allah would protect us and invoked his blessing. Shirley Young added, what they likely saw could have been mirages, optical illusions common in the desert that indeed inspire bewilderment in those who aren't aware. While talking, Yi Xin came over and quietly pulled Shirley Young aside for a private conversation, after which Shirley Young turned to me and mentioned they had something to attend to behind a nearby dune. Guessing that Yi Xin probably needed to relieve herself and was too scared to go alone, necessitating Shirley Yang's company, I nodded at them, advising, take a flashlight and a whistle with you. If there's any trouble, blow the whistle hard. Go quickly and come back quickly. Shirley Young agreed and walked hand in hand with Yi Xin behind the nearby dune. Fatty asked me if there was any liquor left. I told him it was all gone and that even if we had brought a barrel of booze, it wouldn't have lasted with his drinking. I urged him to drink some hot water instead and get some rest, warning that if we couldn't find a water source in the next 5 or 6 days, we might have to reduce our daily water rations. My words were merely meant to frighten Fatty a bit. Even if we didn't find an underground river in the desert, I had ways to ensure we had just enough water to drink. It was a last resort, quite troublesome, but it worked, a survival technique I'd learned in the army. Without water, survival in the desert is dire, considering 2/3 of the human body is water, and losing just 5% can cause dehydration. Anliman was initially adamant about not entering the Black Desert because it lacked fresh water. Although underground rivers existed, they were too deep to access. Digging beneath the roots of saxaul bushes, the typical desert shrub, would only yield wet sand and briny water, which could make thirst even worse. I had discussed these techniques with Anliman, and we had a private agreement not to proceed any further if even the saxaul bushes ceased to grow. Only then did he consent. Those trained in desert survival in the military knew that shallow areas in the deserts of Xinjiang often contain saline water with high mineral content. By digging at the base of desert plants, one could reach damp sand and brackish water that, after simple evaporation and filtration, provided small amounts of fresh water, limited but sufficient for survival. Just as the weather started worsening with increased winds, a sharp whistle from behind the dune alarmed everyone. We quickly grabbed our entrenching shovels and rifles and ran towards the source of the sound. Thankfully, we were very close. It took less than 200 steps, covering the distance in just a moment.